What's up, everybody? I'm TJ.
And I'm Kelsey, and we are
the Nashville Wine Duo. All right, everybody. We are here.
We are here.
With another podcast. We are in Franklin, Tennessee today, and we have the pleasure, our first ever interview with a wine importer.
Yes.
So we're excited about this one. JD.
Hi.
JD. It's kind of cool. I'm here with JD and TJ.
That's right.
You just need some initials.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for meeting with us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited.
Yes.
We're excited. We've been looking forward to this. We have never interviewed a wine importer, and I have so many questions for you because I can't wrap my mind around what an importer, what's entailed in doing that. So
I'm sure I'm going to disappoint you.
Well, do you want to talk first about what he just poured us and then go into the questions?
Yes. So what did you just pour us?
For this wine right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first wine is from the Loire Valley, which is the area that I specialize in. I specialize in northern France, but the real heart of my portfolio is in the Loire Valley. And this is made at the end of the Loire Valley in Muscadet, but it's not Muscadet. So Muscadet, as many of you know, has to be Melon de Bourgogne, this grape called Melon de Bourgogne. But this is made from the non-traditional grapes of Muscadet. This has a little Pinot Gris in it, Sauvignon Blanc, some Chardonnay, but it still grows on this super mineral soil of Muscadet. Rock, it's just pure, solid rock. I'm not talking about pebbles or gravel. It's just cliffs and cliffs of rock with a little bit of dirt on top. And so this is a blend that comes from this area. It's called Armorica, and it's brand new. It's literally a wine that I kind of made with the winemakers about 6 months ago. We kind of did a tasting of the juice from their property. And I'm excited about it. The name Armorica is the old name for Brittany. So Brittany is the area of France just north of the Loire Valley. It historically used to come down into the Loire Valley and encompassed Muscadet, which is at the end of the Loire. And the old Latin name, when Julius Caesar conquered France, the old name that the Romans gave to this area was called Armorica. So it's just paying homage to the history, the 2,000-year-old history of winemaking in this area. So,
very cool.
Very cool. Well, cheers.
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 Yes.
Thanks for letting us try this.
Yeah, sure. So it's a Sauvignon Blanc blend, 50% Sauvignon Blanc, 25% is Sauvignon Blanc that's harvested slightly early to give you kind of citrus, lemon, grapefruity kind of aromas. 25% Sauvignon slightly late to give a little bit more tropical aromas. And then 25% Chardonnay and 25% Pinot Gris. Pinot Gris gives florality. Today it's smelling very Sauvignon-y.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's all tank, just very dry. It's completely zero sugar. It is about 12% alcohol, so it's a great summer hot weather wine because it's low alcohol and
I love it.
no sugar.
I feel like when you were talking about like the rocks and stuff, like I feel like it definitely, you get that like Flint.
For sure.
Right, yeah,
for sure.
Right,
There's
when I
almost some
first
smokiness
tasted
to it, which I love. And
the smell is actually, it's really like, I don't know, it's really pretty actually.
Okay.
I don't know, I feel like
that.
it's like light and
yeah.
fun, and
That's a great wine.
this is really good.
So we're just kicking this off here in the States, and we now sell it in about 15 states now. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's a great wine.
brand new.
So where can people find this in?
Locally, they can find it at St. Goose in Franklin.
Okay.
They can find it at several shops in Nashville. It's distributed by a company called Best Brands. And so anybody can ask for this wine at their local shop, and Best Brands will deliver the wine to the shop the next day. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is delish.
Right.
Good. I'm glad you like.
So I gotta know, how did you get started? How did you start loving wine and then progressing into importing?
So I did not grow up in a family that drank wine. So I had no history in it. I grew up in Arrington, Tennessee, which for those of you who don't know where that is just like a wide spot in a road in Williamson County, out in the country on a farm. And but when I got to college, I worked in a kind of French restaurant in Knoxville. And then when I graduated school, I went to do my MBA in France. So I lived in Paris. I did an MBA in international business, and I absolutely fell in love with French wine. And the thing that I really fell in love with was the unpretentiousness, if we can say that, of French wine. The sort of the idea of drinking wine as a part of everyday life, not drinking in excess, drinking wine as an agricultural product. It's just a regular, normal, everyday thing. And I think a lot of Americans think of French wine as luxurious and castles and, sort of very fancy. And it is that. There is an aspect of that. But the more I got into wine, the more I realized that I saw these similarities between growing up in a farm in Tennessee and farmers in France. I mean, these are people who have their hands in the dirt, and it's a real agricultural product. And I loved that. I could relate to that. I saw I fell in love with wine first, and then I fell in love with the whole idea of people who spend their entire year working for 5 or 6 or 7 days of harvest, just getting. I loved that idea. Yeah. And so I just absolutely had to get into it at that point. So I was like, this is for me. I don't know how it's going to happen, but this is for me.
Did you ever want to just be like a winemaker, or did you want to, what facet, like in the beginning, did you want to kind of slide into in the wine world?
I wanted to tell people about it.
Okay.
I'm fascinated with winemaking, but what I really love to do is tell the stories. I love to experience the stories, tell people about the place from which they come, the winemakers themselves, the history of the families who make these wines. Many of the properties that I work with are multi-generational. Sometimes there are 3-4 generations still living on the farm, which is wonderful. Some cases, in one case, 500 years of winemaking on the same piece of land. I think that's fascinating. I love that. I absolutely love that, and I love telling people. Here in the States, we have just such a short history for our own country, and a lot of these wineries are older than our country, and I love telling that story. It's really neat to me.
That's so cool, and I love how you talked about how that being there related to you saw a similarity to growing up on a farm to then being over there, and and I agree with you that people do have this vision of wine in France, and you're no, it's just it's an everyday, it's a part of life, it's a part of nature.
Absolutely.
That's super fascinating to hear you say that, because I do agree with you. I feel so many people go there and you're oh man, I couldn't ever live that kind of life, and you're no, you go over there and people are just, and they're not using it in excess. It's just it's just eating a meal every day. It's not this thing that's made up in people's minds. That's super interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we also have this idea that wine, French wine or Italian wine or something has to be expensive, or obviously you can find inexpensive wines from those categories. You can find very expensive wines, and that the people who are making these wines are somehow rich or special in some regard. The thing that makes them many times special is that they've simply inherited the land, and what they do with that land is the interesting thing. Do you inherit the land and just make it the same way it has always been made without questioning, is there a way to do this better? Or do you inherit that land? Do you say, oh my gosh, I've just been given this amazing piece of earth that has so much history, and the Vikings were here, the Romans were here, the English conquered this town, plus. What do I do to just absolutely make this the best that I can make it in terms of winemaking? And a lot of times these are winemakers who are barely holding on financially. These are not necessarily rich people. These are just farmers. And I love that story. I love kind of helping them through that, watching them grow, growing with them, helping them grow by selling a lot more of their wine here in the U.S. and seeing that success the success that we have helps them. Yeah.
So you were a history buff too.
I love history.
I can tell.
See, it's maps on the wall. This is Omaha Beach. So,
well, I was just thinking as you're talking, I'm he loves history. That's why he loved this so much too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's just everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. Yeah, for sure.
That's really cool.
I have this one. If I can just tell one quick
anecdote.
I have this one winery in an Appalachian region called Chinon, which produces Cabernet Franc wines in the Loire Valley. And I had visited this property a couple of times, maybe even 3 times, before they told me that the area in their backyard, which they just called Les Blancs Manteaux, which means the white coats, was named that because the Crusaders had a house there.
Wow.
And I'm like, how do you not tell people that the first time they come to visit? It's just like a very normal part of life for them, that there's just history literally in the backyard.
Wow.
And it still carries the name hundreds of years later. So anyway.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you were in France.
Yes.
Found this love of it.
Yeah.
And then how did that turn into like what you're doing
Yeah,
now?
so I came back and I started looking for a job in the wine business. It took about a year and a half. I found a job on Monster.com, if you can believe it.
What?
For working for a wine import company in New York City, and I talked my way into that job. It was to be a director of operations of a company called European Cellars. So my wines are sold through European Cellars today. They're a larger company, and I have a smaller portfolio inside of European Cellars that helps with logistics and sales and sales support, etc. And so I moved to New York City and got my first job in the wine business. And it was mostly back of the house. It was kind of the unromantic side of the wine business. It was the databases and it was the accounting and plus. So, and then I just slowly transitioned to the wine side, which is what I love. So kind of went in the back door, you know, but and then about 4.5 years later, I decided that I wanted to start my own portfolio of the kinds of wines that I personally love. And so I put together this portfolio of wines from the Loire Valley, and then eventually and moved into Champagne, and then eventually moved into Brittany and Normandy with ciders, but it's all northern France. And I did that because, one, I really love the wines from that area. They have a lot of freshness to them, acidity, crispness, low alcohol. I love that style. But there were very few people who were really doing those, especially the Loire Valley, quite well at that point. And so I wanted to do it comprehensively, not just the big appellations like Sancerre or Muscadet, but now there are close to 60 appellations in the Loire Valley. It's incredibly diverse. It's incredibly exciting. I love the fact that I'll never know it all. And so for me, it was just a way to do something that I love, but also kind of fill a need in the market. So
how do you put together a portfolio of wine?
Yeah.
How does that even?
Yeah.
How does it even come about?
Well,
what does it take to do that?
Yeah. So the way that I started when I first started off was the wrong way to do it, and the wrong way to do it is just to get in your car and drive to winery after winery after winery and taste their wines and see if you like it or not. Now, you'll eventually find something that you like, but it just takes a long time. And there's a lot of kind of uninteresting wine that you kind of move through before you find the interesting stuff.
Okay.
So now what I do is I have a system. So most of the time, if I'm looking for a new appellation or a new region or something of that nature, I ask for a referral from somebody I know, a winemaker that I know in that area. I have a phone conversation with the winemaker. I want to see what the initial conversation goes like. Then I taste, and I haven't even gone to the property yet.
Right.
I taste and I see if I like the wines. And then the final step is to go to the winery and generally spend 4 hours or something of that nature there tasting with them. I like to have a meal with them just to see what they're like kind of socially, because for me, it's a long-term commitment. I don't just pick up wines, kind of throw them against the wall and see if they stick or not. This is a 20, 30-year commitment. Yeah. I support every single vintage, good vintages, quote unquote, bad vintages, quote unquote. And so it's a very intimate, tight relationship. Yeah. They're going to have bad years. This grower that we're going to taste next lost 70% of his crop last year. Yeah. That's a tough year. Yeah. I have to support that. He's going to support it when sales are low because of tariffs or COVID or something like that here. So that's the process that I go through. Above and beyond that, everyone who is successful, I think, has to have a point of view. What is it about your portfolio of wines that is specific or unique to you? Do you specialize in one region, for example? Is that your thing? Is it that you do only biodynamic wines? Maybe you only import all female winemakers or something of that nature. So my thing was part regional. I do northern France, heavily in the Loire Valley, And I work with people who work organically or biodynamically. And I work with people who harvest by hand, and that's kind of one thing that sets me apart from a lot of importers. I like that real attention to detail, it's that kind of focus and like drilling down. And you go from 300 winemakers in an appellation down to the final 3 candidates, and you pick one of those 3 candidates. That process has served me well. And as a result, most of the winemakers that I work with have been with me for 10, 15 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
Sounds like a marriage.
Yes, it is very much like a marriage.
When you were describing it, I'm like,
it's like dating.
Yeah, like I'm
absolutely.
there through thick and thin. Like I'm there through the hard times and there for the good times.
For sure.
And I'm not gonna like leave you high and dry. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Like you don't hear about stuff like that, like in a working relationship,
right?
Where it's like I'm committed, like because you kind of have to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Wow, that's really cool. That's really cool.
See, it's fascinating.
It is. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So, like, what I was gonna ask, when you were talking about like your portfolio and kind of like what distinguishes you from other ones, what's one of the main reasons you like with the hand harvesting, like why?
Yeah, so I don't have anything against machine harvesting at all. It's just that the area that I work in, the Loire Valley, is quite cold. Maturity is a real issue. So getting fully mature grapes is the issue that they have had historically for hundreds of years. It's actually it's one of the only good things about global warming is that it's easier to get ripe grapes these days. But getting ripe grapes, machine harvesting is extremely difficult because on the east side of the vines or the south or the southeast side of the vines, the grapes get ripe on a Sunday, and on the other side of the same plant, they might get ripe on a Wednesday or a Thursday following that. So when you're machine harvesting, you're harvesting 100% of the grapes there. So you're harvesting ripe grapes and unripe grapes. So what that leads to, unfortunately, is a lot of green flavors, underripe flavors. And I don't want that in wines. So I'm looking for full physiological maturity of the grapes. So many of the properties that I work with are not only harvesting the same row, once or twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times on the same row. A few days later, they're going through and they're harvesting parts of the bunch of grapes, not the full bunch of the grapes. So just getting the perfectly ripe grapes. It's a lot. It's very intensive, time intensive. It's expensive. You have to. This year is a real problem to find enough harvesters. To harvest at exactly the right moment, you have to have a team sometimes of 40 or 50 people. Where do you find that many people who are dedicated enough to do it the way that you want it to be done? So that's tough. It's tough. Machine harvester, you need one person.
Right.
Yeah, and does the machine harvesting, I was curious about this too, because we've visited different vineyards that do it by hand or do it with the machine. Does the machine do damage on the vines at all? You're shaking them, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen much evidence of that.
Okay.
And I love, many wines that, I don't have a problem with wines that are harvested by machine, but it depends on where they are in the world.
Okay.
In areas where there's a lot of sun, you don't really have this issue.
Okay.
Southern France, Spain, parts of Italy, many areas of California, you don't really have this issue.
Because the grapes are all fully mature.
Maturity is not an issue.
Okay.
There. This area, the issue is getting full physiological maturity at the same time on the same plant.
Right.
So
I've never had it explained fully, so that's why I was curious.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're trying another wine.
We are trying another wine.
Yes.
This one, so this is a Sancerre. So from what I think is a top grower called Claude Riffaut. Sancerre is a kind of big appellation. It's the most well-known appellation in the Loire Valley. Sauvignon Blanc is the white grape. It's what we're tasting today. But they also can make rosé or reds out of Pinot Noir. You don't see those as often. This is a grower. This is one of the few growers in Sancerre. There are, at this point, maybe over 300 growers in Sancerre. Very, very few of those harvest the entirety of their vineyards by hand. It's a very machine harvested sort of appellation. That's why you get a lot of green in Sancerre. That's where you get that. This is a fully hand harvested Sancerre. It's aged in barrel. Barrel gives a little bit more texture, so you're going to feel a little bit more texture than a sort of a classic Sancerre. And this is one of his tiny monoparcels, so it's just a little tiny parcel. I think in the U.S. we might have gotten 25 cases of 12, something of that nature. Wow. This is just kind of a fun, you know.
Yeah, it says there's only like 2,600 bottles.
Yeah, it's super small. It's from the 2019, an amazing year. While you might not be able to find this wine in a local wine shop very easily, the growers' wines you can find. Claude Riffaut, he makes a wide range of wines. This just happens to be one of the fun little tiny parcels that he makes.
So what are you getting on the nose? Do you get a little oak?
I get a little on the nose.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah. This is very young. Mm-hmm. This is very young, and so this is kind of a Sancerre that's set up to age for many years.
So how long could you let this age for? This is delicious.
Oh my gosh, it's so good.
Yeah. Easily 10 or 12 years, but I think this could go 15 years or so. Yeah.
So how do you know if it's like a white that you can age?
Well, you can start with the grape. So, the Loire Valley, actually the whites in the Loire Valley age longer in general than the reds do. That seems unusual to us, right? We think of Bordeaux, Cabernet Sauvignon is the one that ages or something of that nature. But there are 2 or 3 grapes that are grown in the Loire that age for a very long time, even in bad vintages from bad growers. And one of those is Chenin. Sauvignon Blanc is at kind of the top of the heap along with Riesling, although Riesling is not grown in the Loire. Those 2 grapes in Northern Europe, Northern viticultural Europe, can age for quite a long time. Chenin, for example, can easily go 25 or 30 years. And in great appellations like Vouvray or Sauvignon, for example, they can sometimes go 60 or 80 years, occasionally 100 years. Oh, for sure, in great vintages. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. Yeah. There's just this combination of the acid structure in this particular soil, which is ocean bed limestone, that produces this wine that has this like a spinal column of acid that just kind of holds the wine together for a very long time. You can find it in dry wines, you can find it in off-dry wines, you can find it in sweet wines. Sweet wines kind of age forever. It's kind of very difficult to kill them, sort of thing. So that's one of them. Muscadet is the other one, and that's the one that people really don't know. So we think of Muscadet as a young, crisp white wine that you drink young. And that is true, but it can also age. If it's made from good growers, it can age for 20, 25 years or so. We sell verticals of Muscadet. We have sold verticals of Muscadet to Michelin restaurants in New York, going back 20, 25 years. And just, once again, there's this incredible acidity that kind of keeps the wine, and they're stunning. And they get more mineral as they age, which is really neat.
Oh, wow.
We recently talked about it, Muscadet, on our podcast.
Yes, I heard that.
But yeah, a lot of people call it Muscadet.
Yeah.
But
it's easily to get confused.
Yeah.
Muscadet, a lot of times I've had people, everyone around, a lot of places, people think that it's sweet. It's going to be sweet. They get it confused with muscadine or muscat or moscato or something of that nature. But yeah.
Well, we've been getting a lot of people on that train because it's such a good wine.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the ones that you've tried have been incredible. This is probably one of the best Sauvignon Blancs I've ever tasted.
Never had.
And I think one of the main word that comes to my mind is like it's very refined. I don't know what it just is. It's like it's
very polished.
Yeah. Like you can just tell that a lot of heart went into making this wine. Like it just feels very special to me.
I do love the oak element.
Yeah, I think it works.
Yeah.
I think it really like brings out this. I don't know. It's just like this.
So it has to be the perfect harvest to pull that off. So if you're doing a machine harvest and it's a more green style. And generally with machine harvesting, you also have much higher yields. You have a lot more grapes going in. The oak generally stands apart from the wine.
Right.
And here, where it's extremely low yield, tiny monoparcel, it's quite integrated.
Yeah,
it's kind of a rarity.
It's complementing what's going on.
Totally.
Like it just adds these elements to it instead of like being overpowering and be like, oh, like this is oak. Like it's just a nice blend of flavors.
I do have a question too about like how would you? So a lot of people really got on this like train of like Sauvignon Blancs from Marlborough, like New Zealand, and that's kind of been like a trend over time.
Yeah.
And what would you say would be the main differences between wine from that region versus like Sauvignon Blancs from that region versus Sauvignon Blancs from France?
I would say the biggest difference is in the aromatics. You get quite different aromatics. Generally in France, you get more minerality. And please don't kill me, all of you who make Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand, but my experience has been that you get more obvious minerality. Whereas Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand is extremely pungent. It's very explosively aromatic, but generally not rock kind of flavors, not rocky kind of flavors.
More like tropical.
You get a lot more tropical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's probably just, it's obviously an issue of terroir, but it's also probably an issue of maturity and as well.
Do you think that, I don't know, because I've noticed when you go to more like, I guess like your average grocery store where some people just go to buy a wine, like I tend to see more of that represented than any other.
It's a very popular
Sauvignon
style.
Blancs.
It's a very popular style.
I was just wondering if it's also like, is it easier maybe to import or
it's
I don't
not
know.
easier to import. I think there's a lot of it there because there is a lot of demand for it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who like that style.
Yeah.
They're often inexpensive, and more power to you if you like that.
Yeah,
That's great.
totally.
There's a lot of different expressions of every grape out there. So this is just Sancerre at this level is very much about the rock.
Yeah.
And what's below the ground, and that's what comes out. The really neat thing about this area is that Sancerre lies on the edge of where an ocean was over northern France, what we would call the beach, quote unquote, of this old ocean many millions of years ago. And if you don't believe that, you just have to walk through these vineyards. And when you put your hands down in the dirt and you kind of move it around and disintegrate some of the dirt around and leave the rocks in your hands, you'll realize that the rocks are not rocks; they're oyster shells.
Oh my gosh!
It's incredible.
Wow!
And there are just millions of them.
Yeah.
And they're everywhere. You don't have to look for them.
Yeah.
And some of these vineyards around this village in particular. So that's what it's planted on. It's planted on this old ocean bed. The ocean went away, and that's what these vines are planted on. And that band, which is called the Kimmeridgian band, the Kimmeridgian limestone, runs from Sancerre into Chablis, just to the northeast of there, and into southern Champagne, an area called the Côte des Bar. And those three appellations with different grapes have this same minerality and high acidity, rockiness sometimes to them, that kind of brings them together, which is really neat.
So cool.
3 separate wine regions: Burgundy, Champagne, and Loire.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I know.
Yeah, it all adds to what we're tasting. I mean, wow. Yeah.
But I tell people, you can learn all these facts, but then at the end of the day, do you like it or do you not like it? And if you like it, that's great. And sometimes you don't need to have all that information. A lot of times consumers really don't care. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, the wine has to be delicious. But I think that it adds context. I like adding context to it. That's a big part of what I do, is just telling these stories. I think it adds a lot of value when you're tasting wine that's grown on this old ocean bed. I mean, that's really cool. It is to me.
So you do like the educational aspect of wine.
It's really important for what I do because I work in an area of the world that people don't know as well.
Yeah.
So have to create images for them, ideas and images in their head to kind of express what it's like there, because if you're not there, you have to kind of give a sense of the area.
You got to tell the story and be able to have them envision being there, taking this, like you were just describing, taking the soil and finding the oyster shell.
Absolutely, for sure, sure.
Yeah. How many wines do you have in your portfolio right now?
About 120 now.
Okay.
Yeah. 25, 26 properties.
How much do you travel like in a year?
Yeah, so I go to France 2 or 3 times a year, and but I spend a lot of time traveling domestically. So I have one distributor in almost every state. Well, maybe I don't know, 36, 37 states perhaps at this point. And so a lot of my time is going to visit the distributors with whom I work, educating their sales team, educating sommeliers in the area, wine shop owners, et cetera, and helping them to market the wines. So that's important, to be out there and show people the new vintages, show people new wines. So yes, I travel quite a bit in the spring and the fall. The summer and the winter is a lot less. It's a lot of work.
And you said that before we started doing this, you said your wife teaches French. Did
Yeah.
you meet her in France?
No, we met.
Okay.
We met in college at Tennessee, but we broke up, and when we got back together, we were both living in France.
Oh,
She was living
cool.
in Brittany, Armorica.
Yeah.
And I was living in Paris. We were both going to school at that point, and we got back together in France, and here we are.
Wow.
Are you both fluent in French?
We are, yeah.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Well, she has a PhD in French. She's a lot fancier than I am.
Okay. So what's one of her favorite wines?
She loves these styles of wines here, very bright, crisp wines like we just tasted. This is kind of a dream. The Sancerre, for example, is kind of a dream wine for her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Cool.
she loves champagne. I mean, she's a woman of very expensive taste
Yeah.
when it comes to champagne.
Are you really big on like food pairings with wine?
I mean, I don't know about big on it. People like what they like. Is the way I see it. I'm generally, there are so many different pairings that you could do with any individual wine. I try not to do tell people very specific things to pair. A wine that has a lot of acidity, the more acidity it has, which is a huge part of my book, the range of possibilities opens up. Low acidity wines, it closes down. So there's just so much potential for all of these wines that I really don't get into pairings as much. It's just, it's a big thing in France, sort of the whole pairing, the specific wine with this, and there are people who are really good at it. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just say, drink what you like with what you want to eat.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, maybe let's not do a dozen oysters with a Napa Cap. Let's maybe not do that. If we could avoid doing that, that would be awesome. But
this would go great with oysters.
yes, it would for sure.
So before we dive into the last wine, why don't you tell us about your book?
My book.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about a book.
Oh no! When I say a book, I mean my portfolio. It's another word for my portfolio.
Your book. Okay, well,
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
I thought you were talking about like an actual book.
Oh,
right?
no. Maybe one day I'll write a book.
No, you did. I mean, the way you were talking about it, I was like,
No, I'm sorry.
book.
I'm sorry. It's kind of industry slang. It's another word for portfolio. So the portfolio of wines.
Well,
that
the
I
way you
have,
talk,
it's
like you
Well,
clearly
maybe
you
you
should.
should
I
write
think
a
I have a lot.
book.
I do have a lot of stories.
No, I mean it.
happened-
Like I was listening to, I'm like, I want to know
that
about his
happened
book
on
because I
there.
want to read his book. That's
No,
hilarious.
I'm sorry. I wish. One day we'll see if that's going to work out or not. No, it just means my portfolio. So anyway, yeah, I have about 26, 27 properties in the portfolio.
So you said each state you're working with a different distributor?
Yeah. So
Okay.
U.S. laws require generally that you have one distributor per state.
So here in Tennessee, you work with Best Brands.
I work with them in Best Brands in Nashville
Yeah.
and in Chattanooga.
Okay.
So, and then in Knoxville, I have someone else called Knoxville Beverage. And in Memphis, a company called Phoenix.
Okay.
Tennessee is an anomaly because it requires multiple distributors in the same
Tennessee
state.
seems crazy.
It's a little cray-cray. And
Yeah.
it's high tax for alcohol. And,
Yeah.
Well, we were hanging out with some friends last night that they have a wine.
They have vineyard.
They have a vineyard in Argentina.
Yeah.
And they were telling us that I guess when you have a relationship with a distributor, right, that it's like it has to be like 99 years or something like that. Wasn't that what they were saying?
Yeah, when they sign a contract with
When
the
you sign it,
distributor,
yeah.
like, unless they release
And
you or
so,
something.
yeah, like we thought that was kind of crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, like 99 years, and like then what if it doesn't go?
Well, that's exactly it. So a lot of states, once you choose a distributor, you're kind of married to that distributor, and those are states which we call franchise states. They own the franchise. They own the rights to that brand whatever brand it is. It's not my entire portfolio, but it would be this bottle of wine. The brand that represents, they would own that. Now, that's not every state. Some states, if you're unhappy with a distributor, you simply move to another distributor. But there are some states where you can't leave. If you leave, the only way to leave is to, well, you can do it kind of two ways depending on the state. The new distributor, if you want to move to someone else, can purchase the rights, like literally write a check for the rights to that, and it's generally a multiplier of yearly sales. Or you can kind of prove over the course of 3 to 5 years that they are not doing the job, and that requires a long time and a lot of documentation, and generally people don't really do that. So it is what it is. It's kind of a pain in the neck, but it does, to them, it kind of protects them from doing work, a lot of work, and then somebody else taking the credit for it, and after they built a brand, somebody else reaping the benefits of that. I think that's why it's originally was set up, and I get that. I totally get that. But I would kind of like it to be between the two. I'd kind of like it to be easier to leave some distributors, but it is what it is. Every state is different here in the U.S. And then, of course, there are some states where the state controls the wine business. Pennsylvania is one of those states where you sell to the state. The state makes the buying decision, and then they have the state stores. New Hampshire is another one of those where they have the state store. So when you go to buy wine, you have to go to a state store to.
Is it more East Coast that does that kind of concept? It seems like it.
Yeah, it is. It's more on the East Coast. Utah has a little bit of that as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's mostly East Coast.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's some states where you can do whatever
you
you want. You can do whatever you want, whatever you want. So
Well, those are the states you like to work with.
Of course. Of course. Yeah,
all day long.
Absolutely. Love that.
Well, we're going to try this last one.
Yeah. So last wine is really one of my favorite wines in the book. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I do. This is a grower called Jean-François Mériot. And Mériot, he is in an area of the Loire Valley called the Touraine. The Touraine just means the area around the big French city of Tours. There are kind of fancier appellations inside the Touraine. Vouvray is inside the Touraine. Chinon is inside the Touraine. And then you can also have just regular Touraine. It's kind of like the idea of like Côte de Rhône, where you have Châteauneuf as a more prestigious appellation inside this area, called the Côte de Rhône. It's the same concept. So this is an old vine Gamay from this area called the Touraine. The wine is called Le Bois Jacou, or the Jacou Forest, the Jacou Woods, which is just the old parcel that is there got that name because the forest that surrounded it had that name back in the time. One of the really neat things about a lot of these old names is that they have been around for hundreds of years. Nobody knows why a lot of them are called what they're called. They have no idea. It's just that a lot of them were codified when Napoleon named himself emperor, and things didn't really go well for him in the end. But when he was in power, he actually mapped all of France, including every piece of land and what it was called at that point. Every hillside, every field, and each little field and hillside had a name to it. And it could be like one in Sancerre is called the place of the goats. There's another one in Chinon called the Two Dogs. This one is called the Jacou Forest. Maybe somebody with the name Jacou owned the woods at one point. Yeah. And it just stayed for 100 or 500 years. Nobody has any idea. So anyway, so this is a very old vine Gamay, hand harvested Gamay that's aged in these big, huge wooden vats called foudre in French. Gamay, of course, is known really more in Beaujolais. This, I would say, has a more Loire kind of accent on it. It has a little bit more herbaceousness to it. It's not the kind of tutti frutti style Nouveau Beaujolais kind of Gamay. This is a very serious, structured Gamay. More similar to like a cru Beaujolais.
Yeah, we were learning about carbonic maceration the other day with Beaujolais.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So how old are the vines that this...
So the oldest would be probably 70 years old, which is quite old for this area.
Yeah.
And the youngest would be in the 30s, something of that nature.
Okay.
You don't find incredibly old vines in this area like you do in Spain. Parts of Spain, you find like 100 and 120-year-old vines. The Roussillon in France, you find sometimes the same thing. Here, they're not quite as old. That's what old vines are considered in this area. The really neat thing about, if I can just do one more history story.
We're good. We like it.
Is that the barn that this winery is based in, and it really is an old barn. It's an old stone barn that was built over the mouth of a cave. American soldiers lived in this old barn in World War One. As they finished fighting in World War One, they're heading back to the coast to get the ships to take them back to the States, and they had to be lodged somewhere. So some people put them up in the town hall, some people put them up in the church, and some people put them up in their homes or in their barns. So we have evidence that a lot of Americans were in what is now the winery, and they made wine at that point. And there was a lot of wine around, I'm sure. So these boys had a really good time. A lot of Americans hung out for a few weeks in this barn, and they left graffiti on the walls.
Really?
They carved their names and where they were from, and the date and that kind of stuff. And you can go and you can still see that.
Did you go?
Oh yeah,
you saw?
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's I think there's a picture on my website that shows one of the guys the graffiti that he left. But I just love that. My great grandfather stayed about 15 minutes from there in a little town. We found that in his notebook that he brought back from France. It was 15 or 20 minutes away. So.
Was he in the war too?
He was, yeah. He was in World War I. He was a 19-year-old farm boy, never really left the South, and became a machine gunner's assistant and went to France. Got himself a ticket to France.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've heard so many, like doing our interviews, which we've done now for a couple of years. We've heard so many stories of military people.
Yeah.
Their father, grandfather, great-great-grandfather went over to Italy or
Sure.
Yeah, and that's actually how they started loving wine.
And that's how they started.
That's
great.
Yeah.
That's where their love for wine kind of started.
During World War
And
I.
then they came back to the
World War II.
States and planted a vineyard.
That's really neat.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, it always goes back to military and just being over in France.
Yeah, there's one, we're actually going to Georgia again in October, but there's a vineyard that we go to called Crane Creek that's in Young Harris.
Yeah.
And he's a third generation winemaker, and his grandfather was in the war and went to Italy and then just fell in love with wine and came back, and they're on the Appalachian, so they're like really, really high up, like 2,000 feet.
Neat. That's great.
And you're talking about like in terms of like alcohol, like they sit at like 11-12%.
Oh wow, that's quite low for the South.
Yeah, and they're very, I mean, they do Sauvignon Blanc, they do, it's just this crisp, clean wine, and you taste like the little earth when you're tasting it. You're like, this is the earth that it's coming from.
I need to try those.
You should go there, because I mean, really, we were so amazed. We met them. He was doing theater for change in Nepal, him and his wife.
Oh wow.
And then he just decided that he got a full scholarship.
Sure.
And then was just like, I think I want to do wine, and then came back, and I mean, you meet them and you're like, they're the coolest people. I mean,
and it all started in Italy. Came, Italian wine.
Yeah.
Came back and was like, well, what grapes can we grow here in northern Georgia?
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's start planting those.
Yeah.
But take the Italian kind of approach to it.
Sure.
And then we know another winemaker in northern Georgia. He's from Italy, Italian winemaker.
Married to a French woman.
Okay. And now he's making wine in northern Georgia. And he's taken an Italian wine approach to making muscadine wine, but then bringing over Italian wine to the winery there, and it's unbelievable.
That's actually what kind of really made us start to fall in love with wine. I think even more so is when we started to visit Georgia and we met these winemakers, and it was before, like, kind of what you were talking about earlier, like it was very glamorous to us, very like more pretentious.
Yeah.
And then when we met the actual winemakers, you just realize like it's such a hard job, and they're not necessarily like, it's not this like Hollywood. They're actually so down to earth, and like, they're getting inside these vats and like cleaning them out. I mean, like, it's a dirty job.
Absolutely.
Like
it's very physical
24/7. And I don't know, that was kind of like.
Well, the one say is like 80% farming.
Yeah.
8% farming and
20% something
something
else. I don't know.
else.
And they,
Yeah. You know, it's like
Yeah.
it's all work.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. This is the fun part of it.
Yeah.
This is the drinking
This is
wine,
the
the
glamorous
product,
part.
but
And then a little consumer goes, looks at a shelf and just grabs a bottle. And it's like, the effort and time and work that many
sure,
hands have
sure.
put into this.
Absolutely.
I mean, even your part of like traveling to France and like finding
just to get it on the shelf.
Just to get it on the
Absolutely.
shelf.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for
Yeah.
These people pay whatever amount just to grab it, and they don't even,
sure. Yeah,
It's wild.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
But like what you said, there's a place for everybody with it, and there's sometimes people don't need the whole background, and they just want a good
They
glass
just
of
want a
wine.
good glass of
Absolutely.
wine.
And that's
There's
totally
nothing wrong with that.
okay.
There's
Yeah, that's
nothing wrong
totally
with that.
okay.
Yeah, that's the beauty of wine, though. I think
I agree.
and I think as people like ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
the more that you kind of want to learn, that's there
But if
for
you
you
don't,
to
it's
learn.
okay.
And if you
Yeah.
just want to drink a good glass,
For sure.
drink a good. No cab with oysters, though.
No,
No cab with oysters.
Yes.
If you're listening to this, please don't do that. Or
Well, this has been so fun.
It's been amazing.
Yes, thank you, JB.
Yes, thank
it's
you
my
for
pleasure.
your time.
Thank you guys
We'll
for
end on
for
a
coming.
cheers and
Yeah.
Gamay, delicious.
Yeah.
Cheers, y'all.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So delicious.